Welcome to Tales from SYL Ranch, now streaming live to YouTube, Facebook, and to Twitch. And I'm Bill Stone. Tonight on Tales from SYL Ranch, we will have the usual weekly Lancaster County, Nebraska virus statistics for where I live. We will talk about how John McAfee was, in fact, insane. Pardon me, I had neglected to put this piece of junk onto the do not disturb mode so that it doesn't stop buzzing me about the fact that I'm starting a stream. Anyway, we'll talk about how John McAfee was, in fact, insane. We will have a review of Superman and Lois, Season 1, Episode 11. Now, we were going to have an appearance by our favorite crypto expert and friend of the show, J. Marshall Presnell. But unfortunately, at the last moment, the internet gods intervened and made that impossible, or at least extremely, improbable. We'll get back to him again next week. So we'll talk about anything else that you want to talk about, anything else that I happen to think about. So this is a live stream, so you are free to talk with me about anything that you like in chat. You can ask me any question, whether it's political, social, the virus whose name I can't mention, on the YouTube side without risking the video being banned, the United States Civil War II, or even things relating to science fiction, fantasy, horror, superheroes, and other related genres. I am happy to answer each and every question in as much detail and as truthfully as I can. There are some personal subjects that I won't get into, but pretty much anything else is fair game. I will get to as many of my viewers as I possibly can with the understanding that I don't really want the stream to go much longer than 3 hours because I am an old man and I have lower back arthritis, and after about 3 hours in this chair it starts to hurt. So as always, to answer the question that nobody asked, what are this week's weekly virus statistics for Lancaster County, Nebraska, where I live? Well, as always, I sourced this with the City of Lincoln, Lancaster County Health Department. In my description box below will be when I'm done with the stream on Twitch, because it doesn't let me give anything like a useful description of the video, sadly. Now, some of my statistics aren't quite the same as the Lincoln Lancaster County Health Department. But that's because I'm actually using a statistic that is more accurate for the current Lancaster County population, and so when you run the numbers, it comes out a little bit differently. As always, the total Lancaster County population remains roughly the same at 324,216. Total number of Lancaster County deaths due to the virus is at 238. Identical from last week, there was no increase. Always, for comparison, I must point out that the number of people who died in Lancaster County of heart disease in 2019 alone was 485. And that means that in over 1.5 years, the number of people who died of this virus remains less than half of the number who died of heart disease in only 2019 alone. If you're going to go on about how we have some kind of serious public health crisis in Lancaster County over the virus, you're going to have to say at least exactly the same thing about heart disease. The total number of Lancaster County confirmed cases is now up to 31,489, which is up 42 from last week. This continues a downward trend in terms of increases and is the lowest number of weekly increases since I started tracking the virus on this show. I've been saying that for weeks now. The number is continuing to go down, 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 down. And in fact, the number of increases is starting to become just statistically insignificant. The number of positive cases classified as recovered is now at 30,451, which is up 297 from last week. That's good. That means 297 more people are classified as recovered. However, I don't know what this classification actually means. So given that there are only 238 deaths, if we do the math, I guess that leaves about 800 people in some kind of Schrodinger's cat-style limbo as both dead and not dead simultaneously. However, this still remains 255 people less than the last week that fall into this group, so those people can now be counted as among the living. The total number of completed vaccinations is at 163,274, up 3,796 from last week, which makes the percentage of the population that has been vaccinated at 50.3596%, which is up 2.1706% from last week. Given our other statistics, rates of increase, etc., as I have been tracking them since this pandemic started, I think we can say that the vaccine has yet to have the slightest impact. Sorry, just checking out here. Well, heck, don't want to play my video. Over on the Facebook side, it's always a fight to get to see my freaking the number of people who are there. You worthless piece of junk. It's always a fight to be able to see my comments over there. You'll have to pardon me so that I can see exactly what I'm seeing. Okay, how about the comments, please, pretty please. Well, maybe I'll see the comments, maybe I won't. Who knows? Go to YouTube if you want to make sure I see the comments. Facebook's great, except that I can't know for sure if I'm going to see the comments as I go along. Deaths as a percentage of confirmed cases is at 0.756%, down 0.001% from last week. Statistically, this has been identical for months now. Deaths as a percentage of the population is now at 0.0734%, which is identical to last week. Not surprisingly, we had no additional deaths, and statistically, this has been the same since the pandemic freaking started. So, one new thing that came to light, the Lincoln-Lancaster County Health Department pushed this out on Facebook just a half an hour, 45 minutes before this stream started. So, I have to tell you that we now, in fact, do have variant cases showing up in Lancaster County. Specifically, we have 166 alpha variant cases, 8 beta cases, 10 delta cases, 21 epsilon cases, 3 gamma cases, 1 iota case, making for the total number of variant cases counted at 209. This is the first time that I have seen these statistics. I am not seeing them on the website as of yet. I may or may not. Those numbers at 209 still seems to be part of the number of confirmed cases. I probably will continue to track this as time goes on, but we will have to see how that goes. Interesting thing that, I popped through on my, just unrelated, popped through on my Twitter feed, one of my followers. It's Twitter, so as always, take it with the large grain of salt that Twitter demands. But had a follower mention that his wife had gone in for an annual mammogram, and they had asked his wife whether she had been given the vaccine, and if so, which arm. She was confused about this, asked why, and the healthcare worker told her that the vaccine was creating false positives on mammograms. So if you have the vaccine and you go in for a mammogram, it's possible that you could be diagnosed as having breast cancer, even though you don't. It probably requires a second test or something like that. But can you imagine how much fun that would be to deal with? Be told, okay, we had your mammogram, we're showing potential cancer in one of your breasts, but hang on a second, because you had the vaccine, so it might not be real. I have to tell you that I personally had an instance where they were worried that I might have cancer before I got the tests back, because they wanted to do testing on me they'd never done before to determine if I had cancer. Just that alone was pretty damned nerve-wracking. So to be told on the basis of a usually very, very accurate test that you might have cancer, but you got to go back and check and make sure, I can imagine would be causing quite a lot of stress for people. Just another thing that we can be told about this, that, this is what happens when you fast track any kind of drug. You don't know what the true efficacy is, and you don't know what the side effects are. Well, here's one of the side effects, that it can give false positives to mammograms. It's just friggin' ridiculous. Here in Lincoln, Lancaster County, Massa decided to lift our chains last week as promised. Oh, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. In Lincoln, Nebraska, all restrictions on this virus have been lifted. Oh, thank you, Massa. However, given the fact that we now have 209 variant cases, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Massa decided to put back some restrictions in order to stop the variant cases, considering that the number of variant cases is now approaching the number of actual deaths. Never mind that none of the variant cases has actually caused a death. But they spent a year and a half destroying our local economy, sending thousands, tens of thousands into poverty, and causing a significant labor shortage right now on the market, so I wouldn't put it past them to do it again. Always remember, we have, in fact, handed total control of our bodies over to government. And the government will, once given power, will never, ever, ever willingly give it back. You have handed your body over to government permanently. Whether you understand that or not, you have done so. It is, I'd like to mention, very, very similar to the airport security theater put in place after 9/11. We turned over our freedom in airports to government pointlessly. Airport security was never going to work. It doesn't work. It never will work, for reasons that if you're in IT security or any kind of security, you understand. Briefly, it's this. If you're going to secure something, you must create a perimeter around it and then allow people through that perimeter, only people that you have given prior access to. You say a small number of people, you say you can come in, you can come in, you can come in. Everybody else stays outside the perimeter. Security cannot possibly work the other direction, which is what they try to do at airport security. You cannot have a public place and only screen out a small number of individuals. It just doesn't work. It is the absolute antithesis of physical security. So it's total theater, but we gleefully handed over our freedom in the wake of 9/11, and we will never, ever, ever get it back. In this case, with the virus, we have gleefully handed over control of our bodies to government. And while they are, oh, thank you, Massa, they have lifted restrictions here in Lancaster County, you can be certain that they understand perfectly that they can take away our freedom of our bodies at any time for any good reason, and we will happily go along with it. As I mentioned, we were going to have a brief talk about, well, not brief, probably a lengthy one, with show favorite J. Marshall Presnell on the subject of some cryptocurrency stuff that's come up. Unfortunately, however, his internet connectivity decided to do some interesting things that are technically a little complex to explain, but made it such that it would have been spotty at best. He might have been able to get on via voice, but the deal with that is Marshall tends to work better when he's got visual aids. And he had some set up for tonight. And so we'll get back to him next week and be able to see some of his cool visual aids. He'll probably be in chat here at some point. So obviously you're free to, throw anything out and we'll talk about crypto if you want. I think one of the biggest things that we might have talked about was just that there seems to have been some more manipulation done by some of the what they call whales in the crypto terminology, the really big players, and they've done a little bit of manipulating that caused the price to go down, but it's still a deal where if you hang on, there's every indication that it's going to continue going back up in this pattern that Marshall showed us a couple of weeks ago. So don't go nuts. Don't freak out. Just like me, I put a little money into it when it was about what it's at right now, or at least the last time I checked. And I'm hanging on to that and waiting for the curve that Marshall showed us to arrive. So we'll see how that goes. So I will talk now about John McAfee. John McAfee, as you may or may not know, was big in the tech industry for a while. He was recently found dead of apparent suicide in a Spanish prison. So let me read to you from the New York Times obituary about John McAfee. John David McAfee, the founder of the antivirus software bearing his name, which, by the way, he no longer has anything to do with and hasn't for a long time, died in prison in Spain on Wednesday after Spanish courts said that he could be extradited to the United States on tax evasion charges. His death was confirmed by his lawyers, and McAfee was 75. After selling his pioneering antivirus firm in 1994 and losing most of his fortune during the 2008 financial crisis, McAfee led a peripatetic life that included a turn to paranoia and a string of arrests around the globe. All that culminated in his detention in Spain in 2020 after prosecutors in the United States accused him of not filing tax returns for several years. The indictment filed by the Justice Department, said that Mr. McAfee had earned millions from promoting cryptocurrencies, consulting work, speaking engagements, and selling the rights to his life story for a documentary, and had tried to avoid taxes by using cryptocurrency and channeling the money through bank accounts. He could have faced prison time if convicted. Mr. McAfee said that he'd been arrested despite paying millions of dollars in taxes and resisted extradition, claiming that he faced political persecution for denouncing corruption in the Internal Revenue Service and opposing the fiat money system, in which central banks like the Federal Reserve control the money supply. But on Wednesday, the Spanish court released its decision to allow the Justice Department request to extradite him, saying that there was, quote, no supporting evidence that such a thing could be happening. The social, economic, or other relevance the defense claims the appellant possesses does not grant him any immunity, the ruling stated. And then another quote, when I heard of John's impending extradition, my team was fully prepared to fight for his innocence before the United States courts, said Andrew B. Gordon, one of McAfee's lawyers. We knew he would appreciate the opportunity to share his story and put the false charges against him to rest. Only hours later, we were shocked to learn of his untimely death. The Justice Department for the Catalan region of Spain said that, pending an investigation, it was treating his death as a probable suicide. It said in a statement that Mr. McAfee had been found in his cell and died, despite efforts by security guards and prison healthcare officials to revive him. And then the article goes on about background information about McAfee. But what you may not know is what those of us in the IT industry, and I was for 40 years, knew about the guy. And that is, he was at best an insane genius, at best. I am generally very, very perturbed, at people, particularly libertarians, who are thrilled with John McAfee. He ran in the primaries for the nomination of the Libertarian Party for president in 2016. Fortunately, did not make it past that, but that didn't cause all kinds of libertarians to, lionize him and think he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Unfortunately, by virtue of being in the industry for 40 years and watching what he did and his various antics, I am not a fan of the man, and I never, ever was. And it perturbs me that so many libertarians are so hot to jump on his bandwagon simply because he does say things about the IRS, he does say things about fiat currency, he does say nice things about cryptocurrency, and appears to have been involved in the crypto side of things, all of which libertarians really like. But he was insane. Okay? Let me read to you portions from a Wired magazine article by let me get the name here, Joshua Davis. This is from November 12th, 2012. This was when he was on the run from Belize police, who were seeking him in connection with the murder of one of his neighbors. He'd lived in Belize in what can only be called a compound, an armed compound. He was living in Belize, and his neighbor was found dead under extremely questionable circumstances. Circumstances that, if you're aware of what was going on at the time and the circumstances of these deaths, you kind of have to say to yourself, hey, wait a minute, maybe McAfee actually did do it. So, this reporter was, on November 12th, Belize police had announced that they were seeking John McAfee for questioning in connection with the murder of his neighbor. 6 months prior to that, however, this reporter had begun an in-depth investigation of McAfee's life, and this is the chronicle of that investigation. If you want to read the whole article, as always, I like to source things. There's a link to it in my description box. Will be a link to it in my description box on Twitch when I'm done, because they don't let me put a useful description in it until you're over. So 12 weeks before the murder, John McAfee flicks open the cylinder of his Smith & Wesson revolver and empties the bullets, letting them clatter onto the table between us. A few tumble to the floor. McAfee is 66. This was again 2012. Lean and fit, with veins bulging out of his forearms. His hair is bleached blonde in patches like a cheetah, and tattoos wrap his arms and shoulders. More than 25 years ago, he formed McAfee Associates, a maker of an antivirus software that went on to become immensely popular and was acquired by Intel in 2010 for $7.68 billion, which would be 10 times that amount today. Now he's holed up in a bungalow on his island estate about 15 miles off the coast of mainland Belize. The shades are drawn so I can only see a sliver of white sand beaches and turquoise water outside. The table is piled with boxes of ammunition, fake IDs bearing his photo, frontiersman bear deterrent, and a single baby blue pacifier. Okay. McAfee picks up a bullet off the floor and fixes me with a wide-eyed, manic intensity. "This is a bullet, right?" he says in a congenial southern accent that has stuck with him since his boyhood in Virginia. "Let's put the gun back," I tell him. I'd come here to try to understand why the government of Belize was accusing him of assembling a private army and entering the drug trade. It seemed implausible that a wildly successful tech entrepreneur would disappear into the Central American jungle to become a narco trafficker. Now I'm not so sure. But he explains that the accusations are a fabrication. Quote, "Maybe what happened didn't actually happen," he says, staring hard at me. "Can I do a demonstration?" He loads the bullet into the gleaming silver revolver, spins the cylinder. "Does this scare you? This scares you, right?" he says, and then puts the gun to his forehead. By the way, a picture of him doing precisely that is the artwork for this freaking video. That is not doctored. That is him putting an actual revolver to his head. "Well," he says, "this scares you, right?" And he puts the gun to his head. My heart rate kicks up. It takes me a second to respond. "Yeah, I'm scared," I admit. "We don't have to do this." "I know we don't," he says, the muzzle pressed to his temple, and then he pulls the trigger. Nothing happens. He pulls it 3 more times in succession. There are only 5 chambers. "Reholster the gun," I demand. He keeps his eyes fixed on me and pulls the trigger a 5th time. Still nothing. With the gun still to his head, he starts pulling the trigger incessantly. "I can do this all day long," he says, to the sound of the hammer clicking. "I can do this 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Nothing will ever happen. Why? Because you missed something. You are operating about an assumption of reality that is wrong." Stop right there. Any responsible firearms owner will tell you that this is a fantastically stupid thing to do. Libertarians who may be watching this or will watch this later on demand, listen up. You know as well as I do, because most of you are very big into the Second Amendment, that this was a fantastically dangerous thing to do. Okay? Fantastically dangerous. One of Colonel Colt's 4 rules of firearms safety is never point your gun at something that you are not willing to destroy. Well, unless you're actually willing to commit suicide, you don't put a gun to your forehead. And I can tell you, because it's very, very embarrassing to me, I once had the only time that I have ever had an accidental discharge. It was when I was dry firing, which is something you can do to kind of learn to how to keep your hand steady while pulling a trigger. I was dry firing, and I thought that I had cleared all the chambers, but I hadn't. I had missed one. That particular gun, it turns out, tends to stick on one of the chambers. You have to be very, very careful about making sure that it gets out. I hadn't done it. Fortunately, however, I was otherwise observing Colt's 4 rules of firearms, and I was not pointing the gun at anything that I did not wish to destroy. However, it did go off, scared the crap out of me. Since then, I have been very, very damned careful to make sure that I observed all of those rules, one of which includes making sure the damn thing is unloaded. I screwed up. Now, if I'd done something stupid like decided to show somebody, hey, look, the chambers are empty, I can point it to my head all the live long day, bam. You don't do that. That's stupid. It's insane, in fact. You never point a gun at anything that you are not willing to destroy. And if you as a libertarian are inclined to just ignore this because of things that he has to say about the IRS and fiat currency and all that, you are ignoring something really big, okay? McAfee did something extraordinarily stupid just then. Just extraordinarily stupid. And that's not the only thing. So, talking about the actual murder in this article that he was sort of accused of, the door's open on it, that occurred on April 30th, 2020. It was Monday, about 4:30 a.m. This is a little bit dramatized because people who write this sort of thing can't help but dramatize things. At 4:30 a.m., a television flickered in the guard station of McAfee's newly built 2.3-acre jungle outpost on the Belizean mainland. At the far end of the property, a muddy river flowed slowly past. Crocodiles lurked on the opposite bank, and howler monkeys screeched. In a guard station, a drunk night watchman gaped at Blonde Ambition, a Madonna concert DVD. The guard heard the trucks first, then the boots hitting the ground, and then the gate rattling as the lock was snapped with bolt cutters. He stood up and looked outside. Dozens of men in green camouflage were streaming into the compound. Many were members of the Belize's gang suppression unit, an elite force trained by the in part by the FBI and armed with Taurus MT9 submachine guns. Formed in 2010, their mission was to dismantle criminal organizations. The guard observed the scene silently for a moment and then sat back down. After all, the Madonna concert wasn't over yet. Outside, flashlight beams streaked across the property. "This is the police," a voice blared over a bullhorn. "Everyone out." Deep in the compound, McAfee burst out of a thatched-roofed bungalow that stood on stilts 20 feet off the ground. He was naked and held a revolver. This is, by the way, as an aside, this is one of those things that libertarians love for some reason. Coming out naked with your revolver. Going back to this, naked. Things had changed since his days as a high-flying software tycoon. By 2009, he'd sold almost everything he owned, estates in Hawaii, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, as well as his 10-passenger plane, and moved into the jungle. He announced that he was searching for natural antibiotics in the rainforest and constructed a mysterious laboratory on his property. Now his jungle stronghold was under attack. The commandos were converging on him. There were 31 of them. He was outgunned and outmanned. One thing to be aware of, I'll find a link to it. There's a great YouTube video that talks about the woman that he hired to come and work on this stuff, these supposed natural remedies. There was some of that going on, no question about that, at least from what she stated. But she also states that he was, in fact, building his own little army there. McAfee walked back inside to the 17-year-old... Oh, wait a second, hold on. McAfee walked back inside to the 17-year-old in his bed. She was sitting up naked, her long frizzy hair falling around her shoulders and framing the stars tattooed on her chest. She was terrified. As the GSU stormed up the stairs, he put on some shorts, laid down his guns, and walked out with his hands up. The commandos collided with McAfee at the top of the stairs, slammed against the wall, and handcuffed him. "You're being detained on suspicion of producing methamphetamine," one of the cops said. McAfee twisted to look at his accuser. "That's a startling hypothesis, sir," he responded, "because I haven't sold drugs since 1983. 1983 was a pivotal year for McAfee. He was director of engineering at Omex, a company that built information storage systems in Santa Clara, California. He was also selling cocaine to his subordinates and snorting massive amounts of it himself. When he got too high to focus, he'd take a Quaalude. If he started to fall asleep at his desk, he'd snort some more coke to wake up. McAfee had trouble making it through the day and spent his afternoon drinking scotch to even out the tumult in his head. He'd been a mess for a long time. He grew up in Roanoke, Virginia, where his father was a road surveyor and his mother a bank teller. His father, McAfee recalls, was a heavy drinker and a very unhappy man who McAfee says beat him and his mother severely. When McAfee was 15, his father shot himself. "Every day I wake up," McAfee says, every relationship I have, he's by my side. Every mistrust, he is the negotiator of that mistrust. My life is fracked." McAfee started drinking heavily his first year at Roanoke College and supported himself by selling magazine subscriptions door to door. He would knock and announce that the lucky resident had won an absolutely free subscription. All they had to do was pay a small shipping and handling fee. We call this an advance fee fraud. Scammers do it all the time today. By the way, if you're watching on any of my streams, I would very much appreciate just an act of some kind in the chats so that I know you're there. Anyway, he was doing an advance fee fraud scheme. Quote, "So, in fact, I'm explaining to them why it's not free and why they're going to pay for it. But the ruse worked," McAfee recalls. He learned that confidence was all that mattered. He smiled, fixed them with his penetrating blue-eyed gaze, and hit them with a non-stop, "Hey, Dalton, glad to see you." Non-stop stream of patter. "I made a fortune," he says, "from advance fee fraud scams, just like the Nigerians do." He spent his money on booze, but managed to graduate and start a PhD in mathematics at Northeast Louisiana State College in 1968. He got kicked out for sleeping with one of his undergraduate students, whom he later married, and ended up coding old-school punch card programs for Univac at Bristol, Tennessee. But that didn't last long either. He was arrested for buying marijuana, and though his lawyer got him off without a conviction, he was summarily fired. Still, he'd learned enough to gin up an impressive, totally fake resume and used it to get a job at Missouri Pacific Railroad in St. Louis. It was 1969, and the company was attempting to use an IBM computer to schedule trains. And after 6 months, McAfee's system began to churn out optimized train routing patterns. Unfortunately, he had also discovered LSD. He would drop acid in the morning, go to work, route trains all day. One morning, he decided to experiment, and this is important, with another psychedelic drug called DMT. He did a line, felt nothing, and decided to snort a whole bag of the orangish powder. Quote, "Within an hour, my mind was shattered," McAfee said. People asked him questions, but he didn't understand what they were saying. The computer was spitting out train schedules to the moon. He couldn't make sense of it. He ended up behind a garbage can in downtown St. Louis, hearing voices and desperately hoping that no one would look at him. He never went back to Missouri Pacific. Part of him still believes that he's on that trip, that everything he's done since has been part of one giant hallucination, and that one day he'll snap out of it and find himself back in St. Louis listening to Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. That is something McAfee has actually said. So keep this in mind. 1969 did an entire bag of DMT, and Self describes it as shattering his mind. From then on, he felt like he was always one step from a total breakdown, which finally came at Omex in 1983. He was snorting coke off of his desk most mornings, polishing it off with a bottle of scotch every day, and living in constant fear that he would run out of drugs. His wife had left him, he'd given away his dog, and in the wake of what he calls a mutual agreement, he left Omex. He ended up shut in his house with no friends, doing drugs alone for days on end, and wondering whether he should kill himself just as his father had. My life was total hell, he says. Finally, he went to a therapist who suggested he go to Alcoholics Anonymous. He attended a meeting and started sobbing. Someone gave him a hug, and he told him he wasn't alone. And that's when life really began for me, he says. And he says that he's been sober ever since. Okay, that's cool, but go back to the entire bag of DMT that he did at once. It is my estimation, as somebody who doesn't know much about it, that at that point, John McAfee became permanently brain damaged, because that's the point at which his paranoid schizophrenia, that includes outright hallucinations, started to manifest. He was a paranoid schizophrenic with hallucinations. We'll talk about that in a minute. So, back to when he was raided. When the Madonna concert ended, McAfee's drunken guard finally emerged from his station, strolled over to find out what was going on. The police surrounded him. They knew who he was. Austin Tino Allen had been convicted 28 times for crimes ranging from robbery to assault, and had spent most of his life in and out of prison. This was one of McAfee's trusted people. He was part of what was a small militia that McAfee was building at his home in Belize. The police lined everybody up against the rock wall as the sun rose. A low, heavy heat filled the jungle. Everybody began to sweat when the police fanned out to search the property. As an officer headed toward an outlying building, one of McAfee's dogs cut him off, growled, and, according to the police, went in for the attack. The cop immediately shot the dog through the rib cage. "What the F?" McAfee screamed. "That's my dog." The police ignored him. They left the dead dog in the dirt while they rummaged through the compound. They found shotguns, pistols, a huge cache of ammunition, and hundreds of bottles of chemicals that they couldn't identify. McAfee and the others were left in the sun for hours. GSU Commander Marco Vidal claims that they were under the shade of a large tree. By the time the police announced that they were taking several of them to jail, McAfee says his face was turning pink with sunburn. He and Allen were loaded into the back of a pickup. The truck tore off, heading southeast toward Belize City at 80 miles per hour. McAfee tried to stay calm, but had to admit that he was in a bad situation. He had walked away from a luxurious life, mansions on multiple continents, sports cars, a private plane, only to end up on the back of a pink pickup truck cuffed to a notoriously violent man. Allen pulled McAfee so close he could be heard over the roar of the wind. McAfee tensed. "Boss, I just want to say that it's an honor to be with you here," Allen shouted. "You must be really important for them to send all these guys to get you." In 1986, this is where we get into where McAfee actually started to make his fortune in the antivirus room. And again, remember that I have been watching him since then, basically. I have watched his antics, and they can only be described as antics. In 1986, two brothers in Pakistan coded the first known computer virus aimed at PCs. They weren't trying to destroy anything. It was simple curiosity. They wanted to see how far the creation could travel, so they included their names, addresses, and telephone numbers in the code of the virus. They named it Brain, after the computer shop in Lahore. Within a year, the phone at the shop was ringing. Brain had infected computers around the world. And at the time, McAfee had been sober for 4 years and gotten a security clearance to work on a classified voice recognition program in Lockheed and Sunnyvale, California. But then he came across an article in the San Jose Mercury News about the spread of the Pakistani brain virus in the U.S., and he found the idea terrifying. Nobody knew for sure at the time why these intrusions were occurring. It had reminded him of his childhood when his father would hit him for no reason. I didn't know why he did it, McAfee says. I just knew a beating could happen at any time. And as a boy, he wasn't able to fight back. Now, faced with a new form of attack that was hard to rationalize, he decided to do something. He started McAfee Associates out of his 700-square-foot home in Santa Clara. His business plan: create an antivirus program and give it away on electronic bulletin boards. McAfee didn't expect users to pay. His real aim was to get them to think the software was so necessary that they would install it at their computers at work. And they did. Within 5 years, half of the Fortune 100 companies were running it. And they felt compelled to pay a license fee. And by 1990, McAfee was making $5 million a year with very little overhead or investment. His success was due in part to his ability to spread his own paranoia, the fear that there was always somebody about to attack. Soon after launching his company, he bought a 27-foot Winnebago, loaded it with computers, and announced that he had formed the first antivirus paramedic unit. When he got a call from someone experiencing computer problems in the San Jose area, he drove to the site and searched for virus residue. Like a good door-to-door salesman, there was a kernel of truth in his pitch, but he amplified and embellished the facts to sell his product. The RV, therefore, was not just an RV. It was the first specially customized unit to wage effective, on-the-spot counterattack in the virus war. Now, just to back off for a second, my own experience with this. It is, as a security professional, which was one of my specialties, it's absolutely necessary to be paranoid about stuff. Certainly today. If you're not paranoid about what could happen, you will miss something. You will cause something to hit you that you could have prevented. 1984, that was not really the case. This was the first time that a virus had really gotten out, and it was when we sort of had a wake-up call and said, okay, this stuff can happen to us. But what McAfee did was make it blow it all out of all proportion, and may turn it from something as, okay, wait a minute, we got to start worrying about this, to, oh my God, it's going to hit everybody. I remember when it happened. And how all of a sudden the fear exploded. It was an early use of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in order for him to make a bunch of money. Back to the article, it was a great publicity executed with drama and sly wit. By the end of 1988, he was on the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour telling the country that viruses were causing so much damage, some companies were near collapse from financial loss. That was a lie. He underscored the danger with his 1989 book, Computer Viruses, Worms, Data Diddlers, Killer Programs, and Other Threats to Your System. The reality is so alarming that it would be very difficult to exaggerate, he wrote. Even if no new viruses are ever created, there are already enough circulating to cause a growing problem as they reproduce. A major disaster seems inevitable. Again, at that time and in that place, not really. He was blowing that all out of proportion to make money. In 1992, McAfee told almost every major news outlet and newspaper that the recently discovered Michelangelo virus, and I remember that one, was a huge threat. He believed it could destroy as many as 5 million computers around the world. Sales of his software spiked, but in the end, only tens of thousands of infections were reported. Though McAfee was roundly criticized for his proclamation, the criticism worked in his favor, as he explained in an email in 2000 to a computer security blogger, quote, "My business increased tenfold in the 2 months following the stories, and 6 months later, our revenues were 50 times greater, and we have captured the lion's share of the antivirus market." Aside by me. I remember Michelangelo very, very, very much. I was getting my associate's degree in computer science at the time. And all of us knew that while it was a danger, and while it was probably a harbinger of things to come, the press, backed by John McAfee, had blown it entirely out of proportion, as is evidenced by the numbers that we actually saw. Back to the article, this ability to infect others with his own paranoia made McAfee a wealthy man. In October 1992, his company debuted on the Nasdaq, and his shares were suddenly worth $80 million. So again, this article is interspersing McAfee's backstory with what happened when he was arrested in Belize. So back to that. The jail cell was about 10 feet by 10 feet. The concrete floor was bare and cold, the smell of urine overpowering. A plastic milk container in the corner had been hacked open and was serving as a toilet. The detention center was located in the Queen Street police station, but everybody in Belize City called it the piss house. In the shadows of his cell, McAfee could see other inmates staring at him. No charges had been filed yet, though the police had confiscated what they said were 2 unlicensed firearms on McAfee's property. They still couldn't identify the chemicals they had found. McAfee said he had licenses for all his firearms and explained the chemicals were part of his antibiotic research, but the police weren't buying it, aside by me. Again, I'll find the video, put a link to it in my description. But he hired a woman, legitimately hired a woman, to come down there and work for him on this stuff. She freaked completely out at what she was seeing. Not only was she not actually doing any of the work that he wanted her to do, she was just given busy work, but she was really terrified by the fact that he was amassing a private army around him. Back here to the article, McAfee pulled $20 Belizean out of his shoe and passed it through the bars to a guard. "You got a cigarette?" he asked. McAfee hadn't smoked in 10 years, but this seemed like a good time to start again. The guard handed him a book of matches and a pack of Benson and Hedges. McAfee lit it and took a deep drag. He was supposed to be living out a peaceful retirement in tropical paradise. Now he was standing in a jail, holding up his pants with one hand because the police had confiscated his belt. "Use this," Alan said, offering him a dirty plastic bag. McAfee looked confused. "Tie your pants," Alan explained. McAfee fed the bag through his belt loop, cinched it tight, and tied a knot. It worked. "Thanks for the piss house." "Welcome to the piss house," Alan said. Back to McAfee's backstory. McAfee lived in Silicon Valley for nearly 20 years. Outwardly, he seemed to live a traditional life with his second wife, Judy. He was a seasoned businessman who startups turned to for advice. Stanford Graduate School of Business wrote 2 case studies highlighting his strategies. He was regularly invited to lecture at the school and was awarded an honorary doctorate from his alma mater, Roanoke College. In 2000, he started a yoga institute near his 10,000-square-foot mansion in the Colorado Rockies and wrote 4 books about spirituality. Even after his marriage fell apart in 2002, he was a respectable citizen who donated computers to schools and took out newspaper ads discouraging drug use. But as he neared retirement age in the late 2000s, he started to feel like he was deluding himself. His properties, cars, and planes had become a burden, and he realized that he didn't want the traditional rich man's life anymore. Maintaining so many possessions was a constant distraction. It was time, he felt, to live more rustically. Quote, "John has always been searching for something," says Jennifer Irwin, John's girlfriend at the time. She remembers him telling her once that he was trying to, quote, "reach the expansive horizon." He was also hurting financially. The economic collapse in 2008 hit him hard, and he couldn't afford to maintain his lifestyle. By 2009, he'd auctioned off everything he owned, including more than 1,000 acres of land in Hawaii and the private airport he built in New Mexico. He was trying in part to deter people from suing him on the assumption that he had deep pockets, but he was already facing a suit from a man who had tripped on his property in New Mexico. Another suit alleged that he was responsible for the death of someone who crashed during a flight lesson at school that McAfee had founded. He figured that if he were out of the country, he'd be less of a target, and he knew that, should he lose a case, it would be harder for the plaintiffs to collect the money if he lived overseas. In early 2008, McAfee started searching for property in the Caribbean. His criteria were pretty basic. He was looking for an English-speaking country near the U.S. with beautiful beaches. He came across a village called on Ambergris Cay in Belize, and in the early 90s he had visited the nation of about 189,000 people and loved it. Today the population, at least it was in 2012, is about 356,000. He looked at the property on Google Earth, decided it was perfect, and bought it. The first time he saw it in person was April 2008 when he moved in. Soon after his arrival, McAfee began to explore the country. He was particularly fascinated by stories of a majestic Mayan city in the jungle and hired a guide to go see it. Boating up a river that snaked into the northern jungle, they stopped at a makeshift dock. The stone faces glared out through the foliage, mouths agape. As the men walked up to the steps of the temple, the guide described them how the Mayans sacrificed their prisoners, sending torrents of blood down the very stairs that he and McAfee were climbing. McAfee was spellbound. Quote, Belize is so raw and clear in your face. There's an opportunity to see something about human nature that you really see in politer society, because the purpose of society is to mask ourselves from each other, McAfee says. The jungle, in other words, would give him the chance to find out exactly who he was, and that opportunity was irresistible. I tell you what, I'm going to jump over some of this. It's a lengthy article. I could spend the next 5 hours doing this. Let me get to some of the meat of this. Well, okay, let me get you to some of the crazy stuff. I have to find it in this article, but I know this stuff by heart, because it's crazy. You may remember towards the top of the article it mentioned the 17-year-old former prostitute that McAfee was dating at the time. Well, it gets a lot weirder than that. He found this prostitute at the slum of a local town, took her in, was sleeping with her. Again, she was only 17. He was like 65, 66. Statutory rape, depending on what your definition is, but from my mind, certainly very weird. Right now, I feel very, very strange, even looking at women who are the age of my children or younger. That's sort of been a cutoff point for my entire life since I had children. Are they my children's age or younger? I don't even want to touch them. I mean, find me older women. So it's weird, psychologically, from my perspective. But not only that, at one point, this former prostitute decided that she wanted money. And the best way to do this would be to murder McAfee. So one night, while he was sleeping, she took out a revolver, aimed it at his head, and shot, but missed. Hit the pillow next to him, awakening McAfee, unsurprisingly. Now, if you're a normal, sane individual, what do you do when someone attempts to murder you in your bed, in your sleep? Well, you show them to the curb pretty damn fast. And if you're in a civilized world, you call the cops and you have her charged with attempted murder or something like that, assault with a deadly weapon, and get her the hell out. He didn't do that. He kept her on. I mean, you see the crazy involved there? That's nuts. That's just plain insane. You don't keep a woman on who has attempted to murder you in your sleep. That's crazy stuff. Let me go to some of the part here, because I want to get it right, about the circumstances surrounding the death of his neighbor. Sorry. It's lengthy. This is a lengthy article here. GSU surrounding the door. Okay. Okay. 8 weeks after this reporter's primary interview with him, his phone rings at 4:30 in the morning. I'm back in the U.S. and groggily pick up. I'm sorry to wake you at this hour, sir, but the GSU had me surrounded last night, McAfee says in a breathless rush. He explains that he's staying at Captain Morgan's Retreat, a resort on the Ambergris Cay, and decided to go for a walk at dusk. He strolled along the beach. He heard the sounds of approaching powered golf carts. You can tell the GSU vehicles because they have this low roar, he says, a hint of panic creeping into his voice. I think they put special mufflers on them to scare people. He dashed onto the porch of a nearby hotel room and hid behind the bushes. He then heard someone cough on the balcony above him. As soon as I heard that, my heart sank, he said. They were effing everywhere. McAfee spends the next 25 minutes describing to me how the GSU silently surrounded him in the darkness. 2 of them were less than 3 feet away, he said. They stood unmoving. No one said a word all night long. They just surround you and stand still. Think about it. It's freaky crap, sir. He sat there all night, he says, terrified by the shadowy figures he was seeing would kill him if he moved. And around 4 a.m. in the morning, he says, they retreated quietly and disappeared. McAfee then walked onto the darkened beach. He thought he could see Marco Vidal heading out of the GSU, motoring away in a boat. He screamed Vidal's name, and Vidal denies any GSU encounter with McAfee after the April 30th raid. A security guard was approaching and asked if he was okay. After a while, my heart was beating so fast, it was like one big hum, McAfee says. I was bursting with perspiration. I suggest he get some rest. He sounds frantic and scared. Then coming back, he says suddenly, this is too effing much. I'm hanging up. I'm going. And the line goes dead. A week later, McAfee calls me from the Belizean-Mexican border. He tells me he's had enough of Belize. A day ago, he was walking down the beach on Ambergris Cay when several GSU frogmen walked out of the water. Later, he says, a troop of GSU officers crowded into his room but didn't say or do anything. I have just escaped from hell, he says. The next day, he's in an $800 a night suite at the Royale in Playa del Carmen, Mexico. It has a sushi restaurant, he says. Do you realize I haven't had sushi in years? He sounds refreshed, and he's feeling good. 6 days pass. McAfee calls again. Good morning, John, I say. Good morning, I think it is, McAfee says. I explain that it's 9:41 a.m. You're kidding me, he says. I haven't slept for a couple of nights. It felt like evening to me. What's going on? I ask. I'm back from Mexico, thank God, he says, explaining he was robbed and beaten outside of Cancun. Now he's on Ambergris Cay. Here it's clear that they're not going to harm me. They're just trying to scare me. They have to up the ante if they're going to continue scaring me. I talked to him repeatedly over the next week. He fires all of his bodyguards because he thinks they're informing on him. He hires William Mulligan, a British national, to take their place. McAfee figures that Mulligan will have fewer connections to the authorities, despite the fact that he's married to a Belizean woman. On Friday, November 12, 2012, I receive an email from McAfee telling me that, quote, a contingent of black-suited thugs disembarked on the dock near his property at 10:30 p.m. The men dispersed on the beach. Half an hour later, all of my dogs have been poisoned. Mello, Lucky, Dipsy, and Guerrero have already died. I had to call Amy to tell her about Mello, and she is hysterical. The next morning, December 12, 2012, McAfee calls to tell me that his dogs died horrible deaths. They were vomiting blood and convulsing on the ground. McAfee shot them to end their suffering. It was an ugly thing. How is Amy doing? I asked. I tried calling her twice. She's not answering. She's not doing well. I suddenly recall a conversation that I had with Urschweller, it's another person, in August. She was describing someone in Carmelita who tortured dogs, and with a chill, I remember her reaction. Mess with my dog, and you're going to get it, man, she said. In another conversation, she said that she had profoundly committed to McAfee. If he asked me to blow someone's effing brains out, I would. This is the former hooker, by the way. Still on the phone with me, McAfee is searching for clues to explain the dead dogs and has noticed that the fence around his property is surrounded by boot prints, military-style boot prints, he says, and cites this as evidence the police were involved. I'm a paranoid person, he says. I really am, but the whole thing looks really weird to me. I point out that his neighbors had been complaining about the barking. In August, Vivian Yu, operator of a bar and restaurant up the beach, asked one of McAfee's security guards to do something to control the 11 dogs that roamed the property. McAfee hired a carpenter to build a fence to corral them. This is where we get into the part that starts to get real iffy with respect to the death of one of his neighbors. Greg Fall, a neighbor 2 houses to the south on Ambergris Cay, was particularly incensed by the racket and aggression of Miss McAfee's mutts. Fall was a big man, 5'11", around 220 pounds, who owned a sports bars in Orlando, Florida, and spent part of the year in Belize. It was a tropical paradise to him, except for the nuisance McAfee's dogs created. They growled and barked incessantly at anybody who walked by on the beach. Fall had once confronted McAfee about the animals in the past. According to McAfee, Fall had threatened to shoot them, but McAfee didn't believe he'd do it. Allison Adonizoyo, who had stayed at Greg Fall's house when she first moved to Belize in 2010, says there was bad blood between the two men back then. McAfee hated his guts, she wrote in an email to me. Earlier in the week, Fall had filed a formal complaint about the dogs with the mayor's office in the nearby town of San Pedro. Now, as I try to catch up on the latest details, McAfee dismisses the suggestion that any of his neighbors could have been involved in the apparent poisoning of the animals. They're dog lovers, he said, and I talked to them this morning. None of them would ever poison the dog. He speaks specifically about Fall. This is not something he would ever do, McAfee says. I mean, he's an angry sort of guy, but he would never harm a dog. On Sunday morning, Fall is found lying face up in a pool of blood. He has been shot through the back of the head, execution style. A 9mm Luger casing lies on the ground nearby. There are no signs of forced entry. A laptop and an iPhone are missing, the police say. That afternoon, Belize police arrive at McAfee's property to question him about Fall's death. McAfee sees them coming and is sure authorities are intent on tormenting him again. He quickly digs a shallow trench in the sand and buries himself, pulling a cardboard box over his head, and he stays there for hours. It was extraordinarily uncomfortable, he says. The police confiscate all the weapons on the property and take Mulligan in for questioning. And when they leave, Cassian Chavarria, McAfee's groundskeeper, tells him that Fall has been killed. His initial reaction, it said, it was the GSU trying to kill McAfee himself. I thought they were coming for me, he said. They mistook him for me. They got the wrong house. He's dead. They killed him. It spooked me out. McAfee decides to go on the run, calling me at all hours. I ask him if he shot Fall. No, sir, he says. That's not even funny. All McAfee knew about the murder, he says, was that the police were after him, and he believed that if they caught him, he would be tortured or killed. Once they collect me, it's the end of me, he says. Over the next 48 hours, McAfee bounces from place to place around Belize, aided by a network of people who can't be followed, he tells me. It's complicated, and there are a lot of risks, and people could turn south at any minute. Samantha Venegas, one of his girlfriends, is with him, and she says they've been subsisting on Oreo Cakester cookies and cigarettes. On Tuesday morning, he says the police raided the house next door, but they evaded capture, landing eventually in a house with no hot water and a broken toilet. There is, however, a working TV. We watched Swiss Family Robinson, he says. It's about castaways. That's why we got into it. It was like, wow, we could do that. We could get a bamboo and build something like that. The movie had a happy ending. McAfee liked this. When this article was published in 2012, John McAfee was still in hiding and in communication with the author. This author did, by the way, go on to write a whole book on this subject. Much of this text that I've just read you makes it into that book. But if you look at what was going on, oh boy, does McAfee look damn guilty of this murder. They've never really been able to get him back for actual prosecution or anything like that. He has been on the run from this one since 2012. But you tell me that in your heart of hearts, you don't think that there might be some possibility that he killed the guy. I don't know. Unfortunately, neither does anyone else. But libertarians love John McAfee. But it is my contention that in point of fact, he permanently brain damaged himself in 1969 when he did a massive overdose of DMT. Because if you look at what happened to him since then, the paranoia, all of that started to really, really accelerate. And in the last number of years, it's just become overpowering. And if you look at his tweets, they're all very paranoid. If you look at, that story he tells about the guys showing up and him hiding in the bushes and all that, step back for a moment and ask yourself, does that make any damned level of sense whatsoever? Does that make any sense that these guys would sit there and surround him and creep toward him while he's sitting in the bushes? Does that make the slightest bit of sense? Is that how any law enforcement in any country you've ever heard about work? Even if it's a corrupt one, if it's a corrupt third world country, have you ever heard about that? It is my contention that at that point, McAfee was outright hallucinating. And probably there are other instances of when he has been hallucinating as well. I think that in 1969, he permanently brain damaged himself. And that ever since then, he has been living a life that he will go several years of being very intelligent, brilliant, in fact, and then suddenly go long periods of time as a paranoid schizophrenic, complete with hallucinations. He is not somebody that the libertarians should look up to, just because he has opinions that we tend to agree with on fiat currency, on taxation, all of that, cryptocurrency, etc. Just because he has those types of opinions and positions does not mean that we should crawl on board with him. I've been watching this guy my whole freaking career. He's done some very brilliant things, but just a complete descent into madness that to me just, stems from this massive overdose that he did of a drug in 1969. He is, or was, from my perspective, an actual brain-damaged, paranoid schizophrenic, complete with hallucinations. The fact that he got within spitting distance of getting the Libertarian Party's nomination for president in 2016 was one of the reasons that I disassociated myself from the Libertarian Party. The guy was nuts. He was insane. He was a brain-damaged, paranoid, schizophrenic, complete with hallucinations. And the fact that that party even considered him, the fact that anyone in that party even considered him, or the fact that any libertarian thinks that this guy was a good person to be around, be associated with, is nuts. They aren't familiar with his entire history. They don't know what I know by virtue of having watched him for the last 40-some years. He has just drifted between being brilliant, being a con man, because it's quite clear right from the beginning he was a con man doing advanced fee frauds. Con man, brilliant, and brain damaged. And as a consequence, a paranoid schizophrenic, complete with hallucinations. A guy who would have a girlfriend of his attempt to murder him in his sleep and then keep her around. I mean, if that doesn't just smell crazy, I don't know what does. I cannot imagine. No one I know is going to tolerate an attempted murder by their girlfriend and still keep her around. They're going to okay, talk to the bodyguard, get her out of here. Don't ever let her anywhere near me ever again. She's crazy. Well, in her case, probably just very greedy. This is, by the way, why, you shouldn't try to bring prostitutes out of the gutter if you're an extraordinarily wealthy man, because, as Bill Burr has mentioned, there is an epidemic of gold-digging whores. In this particular case, the gold-digging whore had planned to kill him and take his money. He's crazy. He really was crazy. He was nuts. As to whether or not he killed himself in prison, I can't say. No one can. Given his tendency towards paranoia, and the notion that he would never kill himself in prison, but he's still extraordinarily paranoid, and had reached the end of the line. He was no longer in a position where he was going to be able to flit about and evade capture. He was in jail. They were going to extradite him. I don't know that it's beyond the realm of possibility that he would have killed himself. He left all kinds of tweets. Oh, man, there's one circulating around today. Tweet that he talked about that if he killed himself, he had amassed an enormous body of information about, corruption within the IRS and other government agencies, and that if he died, he was going to turn it. It was all going to appear on the press's desks, and that seems to me like a complete fantasy or a con job. Take your pick. If anything ever shows up, I'll be stunned. It's a conspiracy along the order that, QAnon did, with no real basis in factual reality. I don't see it happening. I'd be stunned if it did. This is the end of John McAfee. And if you're a libertarian or anybody else who really thought the guy was great, thought that this was the second coming, that we all needed to get out from under the heel of government, you're just nuts. The guy was crazy. He was brilliant in some ways. He was a con man in many others. But he was, at the end of the day, very, very crazy. A paranoid schizophrenic, complete with hallucinations. The entire thing that he talks about happening on his property, hallucinations. And he may well have killed someone. He may have killed that neighbor. I don't know. I don't know. No one will ever know. Because he fled Belize and is not going back, and they can't get him. They can't reach him. He's named as a person of interest, but we'll never know. We'll never know, because there was never any trial. He just ran. He just ran, which in itself is kind of like, okay, well, if you didn't do it, I mean, if I was accused of murder and I knew I didn't do it, and there's going to be lots of evidence to show that I didn't do it. Okay, let's go to Belize. Let's assume that everyone there is corrupt, and I'm taken in for murder. Yeah, ultimately, I assume they still want to get the guy who did it. Maybe they won't be as nice about it, but the circumstances under which that man died stink to high heaven of murder by John McAfee. And again, there's another great video here on YouTube where you can, it's all about McAfee and the army that he was building, because he was building a private army. You can call it a security force if you want to, but given the weapons that he was arming them with, they were better armed than the local police. The research that he was doing, supposedly into homeopathic medicines or medicines based on plants that were found in the Belize area, is totally belied by the woman that he hired to go and do that. She found ultimately that she was terrified working there and got out, escaped essentially as quickly as she possibly could, with McAfee and his guards, his goons, threatening her about, you don't go, you can't say these things, blah, blah, blah. And she was frightened. She was terrified. There was weird stuff going on there that had nothing to do with McAfee coming out naked with a gun in his hand. Just nothing to do with that. For some reason, that's an image libertarians love. The idea that, okay, here's a guy who will fight for himself so hard that he'll come out naked with a gun in his hand, No, it was crazy behavior on his part. He really was brilliant on occasion, con man on many others, a severe drug addict at various times in his life, and probably permanently brain damaged himself in 1969 as a result of a massive drug overdose. He himself says it completely shattered his mind. And he sometimes thinks maybe he's going to wake up and discover that it's all been just some kind of giant acid trip, more or less, and he's going to wind up in his bed listening to Pink Floyd. He said that. I don't think he knows what he knew it was real. So again, I don't usually come on to bury someone or say something bad about them within 24 hours or so of their death. But we're seeing so much idolizing of the man that I can't help it. I've got to say, this is what I have observed over the course of my career with him. This is what I have read about him and seen talked about him, because it's all very consistent. This is a man who had severe brain damage as a result of a massive overdose of a drug in 1969 that led him down a path of paranoia and ultimately paranoid schizophrenia, complete with hallucinations. And is not somebody that should be lionized or looked up to. Dalton Bridges says, just think if he didn't grow up in an absolute garbage home, he could have been an Elon Musk type. Very possibly. I don't know. It's very possible. He was definitely from time to time very, very brilliant. No question about that. But regardless of what happened to him, he is not somebody you look up to, not really. There have been periods where you say, okay, that was brilliant. You did the right thing there. But so much of it is scandalous at best and just outright brain damaged paranoid schizophrenia, complete with hallucinations. That's pretty much all I have to say about John McAfee. If you're a libertarian, get off of that train. If you're somebody who's thinking, okay, this is it, he didn't kill himself, so we're going to see this huge dump of information and dirt. No, forget it. That's not going to happen. That was something he said as a con man. That's not going to happen. Whether he killed himself or not, I don't know. I don't know Spain's reputation for doing that to people. I don't think that there would be any reason for anyone to murder him. I mean, they were going to extradite him back to the United States. Why would you kill someone who's about to be out of your prison? On the other hand, if you've spent two-thirds of your life on the run from the law, and you're finally at the end where they are going to take you back and the United States will put you in custody, I can see killing yourself. I can see that. Again, if you're a paranoid schizophrenic complete with delusions, God only knows. So that's my take on John McAfee. Don't lionize this guy. Don't idolize him. Don't be expecting any massive data dumps. Those are all just smoke screens. He was not that great a person. He really wasn't. And libertarians, please stop. Just stop. You're embarrassing yourselves. You caused me to completely distance myself from the Libertarian Party because anybody considered him for any moment of time as a good candidate for president, because he wasn't. Dalton says, what's odd is that it doesn't ever say that he was made aware that he was going to be extradited, so he wouldn't have had a reason to kill himself. I don't know whether he was aware of that or not. I can't tell from the timeline. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. There's no way to evaluate it from all the way across the pond, and under the circumstances and knowing his general mental state most of the time anyway, there's just no way to tell. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. Fact is, he's dead. And he was never worth lionizing. He was never worth idolizing. That's all I really have to say about John McAfee. So, I do have one other thing. As I said, I'd planned to do a talk with Marshall Presnell about cryptocurrency, but that kind of fell through because of technical issues on Marshall's side. The internet is a wonderful thing when it works. The technical issues that he's having are fantastically stupid. Not his. They're of his upstream ISP. They're doing something just radically dumb. We're hoping next week, so we'll get him next week. There wasn't anything too terribly pressing that he had to talk about. So that said, I'll probably have another review. Bring things up a notch from the general sort of darkness we get into in the strange world of John McAfee's mind. Let us talk about Superman and Lois, Season 1, Episode 11. As always, unlike most reviewers, I do not sit down to rehash the plot to say what I liked or didn't like. You will usually find more depth than most reviewers. However, in this particular case, I generally tend to push myself more on the one thing that I can contribute that may be unique, which is an assessment of how realistic what we're seeing on screen is. Because this supposedly takes place in Kansas. I am in Nebraska. Kansas is our southern border. And so I know a lot about the area. However, we will just take it as read that if you've come to this video and you're staying this long, going to sit through it, you're probably looking for a review, or you just don't care if Superman and Lois Season 1, Episode 11 is spoiled for you. But nevertheless, for safety's sake, we should probably issue a...
Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! All hands, prepare for incoming spoilers.
Yes, it is a spoiler alert, and that is because I am a secret master of fandom, and that means that the fandom is strong with me. But that isn't a boast or a brag. This is just where you find yourself after having watched, read, and listened to over 100 years worth of science fiction. The problem with secret masters of fandom is that we're cursed. You can't see the new stuff without seeing the century that came before. You find out that there isn't very much that's actually original, and it sometimes interferes with your ability to enjoy things. What I don't do is outrage reviews, because there are a lot of reviewers on YouTube who are simply actors portraying outrage because outrage tends to sell. They hate everything with a knee-jerk reflex because the viewers tune in to watch them hate things. But this causes a weird feedback loop between popular reviewers and fans to where ultimately nobody can like anything. But I don't do that. If I like something, I say why. If I dislike it, I say why. And I don't do outrage. Unlike everybody else, I tend to be the adult in this particular room. As I said last week and the week before, I continue to be worried for Elizabeth Bitsy. I discovered she goes by Bitsy Tulloch's health. She is too skinny. She has a sunken eye sockets, sunken cheeks, visible veins in her neck, her head, tendons in her neck. She has all the signs of bad anorexia. Bitsy, for God's sake, eat something. Really, I'm not kidding. Eat something. This was a really interesting episode in as much as it was as close as we're probably going to get to an origin story for Superman in this series. And it's very good. Liked it a lot in terms of it being an origin story. The frame is that Morgan Edge is using this device to look into Clark's mind to see his past and all these things. But it was a good origin story from that perspective. But there's a couple of problems with that. One is that these two actors are clearly in their 40s. If you look at when they were born, they're in their 40s. They are clearly in their 40s. No question about it. And they don't look younger than that in eras when they are supposed to. I don't know if they could afford the software to de-age them, but they needed to be de-aged by 15 or so years. I mean, that's the ages of their sons, which apparently were born not long after they were married. So they should be 15 to 20 years younger. So rather than being in their 40s, they should be in their late 20s or early 30s. And they don't look it. I mean, they the entire time you're looking at actors who look exactly the same age when they're supposed to be younger as they do then. There's also a problem, I mentioned it last week, with Lois seeing Superman. It's the same problem with Lana seeing Superman. And Tyler Hoechlin, good as he is in terms of portraying Superman himself, physically good at it. He's, kind of got how Superman is down. Although, again, guys, give him a shave. He plays Superman well, but he does not play any significant difference between Superman and Clark Kent. And so it really is a problem. The very first time that Lois sees Superman, she should instantly know that it's Clark. By then, she had been spending a lot of time with him, together with him, doing things, working on a story. She should know. It shouldn't be anything. I got a video feed interrupted everywhere. Hang on while I take a look at my secondary monitor to see if my video is going out anywhere. Pardon me. I hate when this happens. My channel, my stream. Okay. Apparently I'm still going out. I've just got all kinds of weirdness happening. As I mentioned early on, we're in the middle of a thunderstorm. If it looks like I'm not going out to mention something in my comments on any platform, I've got errors showing up on all three of my control panels, being interrupted videos and spooling. So if it looks like I'm falling apart, let me know. We do have a thunderstorm here in beautiful Lincoln, Nebraska, so that could be causing an issue. Anyway, let me leave my secondary monitor on so that I can see what's happening. Okay, well, I'm not seeing spinning now, but we'll leave the secondary monitor on the YouTube side. Okay, so anyway, the problem is that Tyler Hoechlin is, what Christopher Reeve often said was that he decided that for Lois not to immediately tumble to the fact that, Superman is Clark Kent, then Superman must be an extraordinary actor. And if you look at Chris Reeve's choices that he made throughout the time that he played Superman, you look at it today and you think, well, maybe, it's a little much. But regardless, he still was different enough that, you could buy it. I mean, the audience knew, like anybody in the world doesn't know that Clark Kent is Superman, right? But the audience certainly knew, but it was enough so that we could say, okay, I can kind of buy that, actually. I kind of buy it. Tyler Hoechlin isn't that way. He is glasses on or off. You can clearly, easily recognize him. When Lois sees him for the first time, it should be not a moment of, oh my God, it's Superman for the first time. It should be, oh my God, Superman is the guy I've been working alongside for the last bunch of weeks. It should just not be an issue. He doesn't look any different, really. The glasses don't cut it with him. So that's a problem. Lois is smarter than that. She should be able to tell, hey, wait a minute, this is just Clark Kent without his glasses on. There's also a problem many times too. Superman gives TV interviews, which they had him doing there. That's a bad idea for Superman, right? Superman really should not be that clearly in the public eye, because it just increases the possibility that somebody is going to see him and put two and two together that, hey, wait a minute, Superman is Clark Kent. People who know Clark are going to see Superman and go, wait, hold on a minute. There just isn't that much of a difference. He should never do anything like, have a TV interview. That should just never happen. As I mentioned last week, in the early days of Action Comics, Superman would appear, do his thing, and then leave. He didn't hang around for pictures. He didn't hang around for videos or interviews. If you're going to do the eyeglasses, that's the only way you're going to pull it off. Have him get in, get it on, get it out, like they say in porn. Just do his thing and leave. Public interviews, nothing. Just Superman mysteriously vanishes the way that you saw when he was originally doing it. That's the only way to do this. Otherwise, the glasses just don't work. Tyler Hoechlin, you're a reasonable, good actor, but you're not making choices that are so radically different as Clark Kent that the glasses will work. They just won't work in this. Then we get down to the part that is what I believe is the only unique contribution that I can add to criticism of Superman and Lois, which is this, the location. Location. It's like real estate. As I've previously mentioned, I have geolocated personally to my satisfaction the location of Smallville, Kansas, which is at 137 degrees, 18 minutes, 35.0 seconds north by 94 degrees, 42 minutes, 19.3 seconds west. Link to it in Google Maps in my description box below. I have, however, had a much harder time dealing with where to place Metropolis. Metropolis is too close to Smallville. People are going there too frequently and too trivially. Metropolis has always been portrayed as a coastal city. Well, a coastal city where New York City is 1,200 miles from Smallville, right? And they had a football game between a Metropolis team and Smallville. Well, it was a high school game. High school athletic districts come into play. You don't play, somebody in Kansas doesn't play anyone in New York. So you can't have Metropolis be that far away, and you can't have it be within driving distance. It's 1,200 miles. It's a number of hours on the plane. You can't just trivially decide, oh, I'm going to go or I'm not going to go. That's a trip you have to plan in advance. And to suddenly not go, as we saw happen in one episode, means that, oh my God, you've just blown $600, $700, $800 worth of tickets that you're not going to get back, right? I mean, it gets ridiculous. And the time periods that we've seen people come and go. So I had provisionally said, okay, well, there's only one way this can work, and that's for Metropolis to be in Kansas. Unfortunately, and fortunately, up until last night, or Tuesday night, they had not shown Metropolis. Hang on, I look like I'm spinning on YouTube. Come on, guys, spinning on YouTube. I'm spinning on YouTube. Let me go live. Looks like YouTube may have killed me. Let me try stop. See if I can get back to YouTube. I've still got me up on Twitch and Facebook, but I don't see me on YouTube. I'm back up. Okay. I'm going to have to reload my secondary monitor to see myself because I look like I'm down. Okay. I am back up. All right. I don't know what YouTube did. I had to drop and come back up. Anyhow, I was still live on the other two platforms, so I'm not sure what the hell is going on. And now I'm spinning over in my control panel, but God knows what that means. The YouTube control panel lies to me all the time. Okay, so I had provisionally said, all right, well, Metropolis has got to be in Kansas for this distancing thing, for the football game to work out. We've just got to move Metropolis to Kansas. And to that point, to the other night, they had not shown Kansas, Metropolis, as having a large body of water near it. And then Tuesday night, in season 1, episode 11, they did. As part of the backstory, they were showing Metropolis having a large seaboard. So that throws everything to hell. I had previously said if they were going to do something like that, I might have to put a Great Lake in Kansas. I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do. Timing, use of those, having those games, and the fact that in Kansas they reference Kansas locations, Kansas counties in various episodes. Smallville has got to be in Kansas. There's just no way around it. By the same token, Metropolis kind of needs to be in Kansas for it to work. But unfortunately, if you're going to do that, well, I know how you can simulate what looks like a seaboard. And that's because I lived in Chicagoland for a number of years. And the way you simulate a seaboard is you have a Great Lake. I mean, from if you go down to see, I've blown away again. In YouTube, looks like. Mother puss bucket. No, I'm still up in YouTube. It just sucks. YouTube sucks, Beavis. All right, I'm up. It just started spinning on me. Okay. So I think I'm going to be because you can have what looks like an ocean if you have a Great Lake. From Chicago, Lake Michigan looks like an ocean. You can't see the other side. It's just a big-ass body of water. Well, I guess I'm going to have to redraw the map of Kansas, or the map of Kansas and Missouri in this universe, and to give it a Great Lake. Somewhere, a major depression in the Mississippi River, where maybe the Missouri and the Mississippi come together, the confluence, give it a giant depression that doesn't exist in our universe, I guess. So next week I'll have a completely redrawn map of Kansas that will include some body of water large enough that it would be similar to a Great Lake. What this really means, what this is really indicative of, is the fact that the people who produce this show are in a place where they think of, places like Kansas as being relatively close. Guys, you have just absolutely open invitation from me. Get on a plane. I'll meet you at Kansas City, and you can get an idea of just how far away things are. It is a generally kind of conceit by people who live in large metro areas that other places are not that far away. No, I'm talking about 1,200 miles. 1,200 miles from here to New York. And similar, it may be even more from where Smallville would be to Los Angeles. These are very, very distant places comparatively. North America is a gigantic continent. You just don't get in a car and drive for a couple of hours to get from Kansas out to the East Coast. It just doesn't happen. So again, I think next week I'm going to have a brand new map of Kansas and probably Missouri, so that we can have a very large body of water, something akin to a Great Lake, that will explain why the hell Metropolis, that must be in Kansas, based on everything we've seen, has what looks like a seaboard. Thanks, guys. I mean, you could have made this easy. You could have could have done it like, okay, we're not going to have a football game between Metropolis. Say it's Kansas City and Smallville. That would work. Kansas City, Kansas, some Kansas City team, because there'd be multiple. It's a large city. And, Smallville, that would have worked. Saying that it takes a long time to get to Metropolis. That's why we don't do it very much, with the exception of Superman, who can be there very, very quickly because he's super fast. That's okay. But when we see, Sam Lane doing it, when we see Lois doing it, when we see Lana, her daughter, whose name escapes me, when we see her just deciding, okay, I'm going to go ahead and not go to Metropolis as if it's nothing. Well, okay. Now we have to put Metropolis in Kansas. Now I have to redraw the map of Kansas and the map of Missouri to include some kind of large body of water. Thanks, guys. You could have done it differently. You were doing so well. For weeks, you were doing so well, I thought you must have actually consulted some kind of map, because you were referencing things that made perfect sense. But no. No, you've screwed up. You've screwed up, and now we have to change the entire contour of I think what I'm going to do is there does appear to be a minor depression where the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers are. I think we're going to have to say, okay, that's a big-ass depression in this universe, and it's filled with water. So look for my map. I'll have an actual map that I've marked up to include this new Great Lake that must exist in Kansas in order for this to make any damned sense. So, I don't have a heck of a lot else to talk about. It looks like it's been about, it's 10:40, about an hour and a half, a little more. And weird things are happening at various services around. It's not just YouTube that's being affected. My guess is something must be going on with my ISP with respect to connectivity. Wouldn't shock me, or something upline, because again, we are having a fairly big storm outside and have for the last 2 or 3 days. We've had one every night. So I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and drop out before something catastrophic happens, and it just drops out for me. So I guess that is all that I have to say about that. Come back next week for my new map of Kansas based on what we've seen in Superman and Lois. I would, of course, love to keep the conversation going, so please leave your comments, your questions, and your nasty remarks, and I'll do my best to respond to you. And, of course, like, share, hit the notification bell, and share me in social media, because that is, in fact, how I grow. If I'm in Rapid City, let you know. I may have... you're going to Freedom Fest? Cool. If I'm in Rapid City, let you know. I didn't know you were in Rapid, Dalton. I may be around in that vicinity come now. It looks like, okay. Get spun for a while there on my secondary monitor. Didn't know you were in Rapid. I may be there in August. I may be spending some time on the family ranch line in August. I could conceivably head over to Rapid at more or less the same time. So it's going to be at least a week, so I may do that. But I'll let you know. Dalton. So anyway, thanks for watching this episode of Tales from SYL Ranch, and I am Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.